Here we go. I think we're live. Hi, everyone. I'm Gotti Schwartz, NBC News correspondent and co-host of Stay Tuned. Welcome to our Next Level Summit panel on social media and news gathering. It is something that has come to touch almost everything we cover. And as we've all experienced from the war in Ukraine and Kanye West to that weird pink sauce on TikTok, social media has become a major source of what we're seeing in the news every single day. But how do we make sure social media is informing us, not duping us? Well, we've got a group of experts who are going to share how they use social media to gather leads, to produce content, to investigate big stories. And we're going to try to make this as interactive as possible. So if you have questions for our panelists, feel free to drop them over in our Q&A tab, and we'll try to answer those live. So let's meet our panelists now. We've got Gostanian. She is NBC News social news gathering senior reporter. Brandy Zadrozny. She is an NBC News senior reporter. Ashton Jackson, an NBCU Academy Embed reporting for CNBC Make It. Jay Valle, another NBCU Academy Embed reporting for NBC Out. And Alexa Volland, a senior manager of Educator professional learning at the News Literacy Project. Thank you guys so very much for joining us today. And let's just jump straight in with social news gathering. I'm hoping to start with you, Ali. First, let's talk logistics. I know we've got a team of like 14 reporters now here at NBC News who are news gathering on social media full time. It feels like just yesterday that there was only like one or two. Walk us through exactly what is social news gathering.
Yeah, so that's a great question to start on, Gotti. So the social news gathering team is a group of reporters who find, verify, and report on breaking news and trending stories. We have team members based throughout the world in New York, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, and London, and we use social media for all aspects of our reporting. So whether that's finding an interview subject for the Today Show, or interviewing people in the queue waiting to see the Queen, or finding user-generated content, or what we like to call UGC, during breaking news, social media is at the center of all of our jobs.
And Ali, I know you guys get calls at all hours of the night, usually from a correspondent that lands or producers that are trying to find somebody that is watching something unfold firsthand, and they may have posted something. What does the job look like from the desk, or if you're working remote, when you're looking for leads out in the field from social media?
Yeah, so like you said, social media is essential in how we cover breaking news and developing stories. So let's take the recent hurricane that hit Florida as an example, Hurricane Ian. So while our colleagues on the climate unit are still trying to determine, where the hurricane is going to hit, the social news gathering team is using various social media platforms and tools to find people who might be affected by the hurricane. So we're looking in local Facebook groups, trying to speak with people who are talking about whether they're planning to evacuate or hunker down for the storm, or we're looking on Instagram or Twitter or TikTok for photos and videos of people boarding up their homes and businesses in preparation for the storm. Then once the hurricane hits, we're gathering UGC, showing flooding or damage to neighborhoods, finding people to interview who have stayed during the storm, and looking for, any of those additional elements that will make our coverage stand out. So any and all of these elements may then be used on any of our network platforms like The Today Show, Nightly News, News Now, NBCnews.com, and so forth.
It's funny, Ali. It's almost like, in some regards, social media is our modern day phone book. And Brandy, it's not just that. I mean, it's also a place that we look to see what the pulse of the country is. I mean, you've used social media to inspire some really fascinating investigative pieces. This year, you published a podcast, Tiffany Dover is Dead. You dove very, very deep into this widespread internet rumor. Can you tell us a little bit about the process and how you use social media in your investigations?
Yeah, so hi, everybody. Nice to be here. I think, what Ali was just talking about, social news gathering is really great at sort of parachuting into any story on the planet and finding all of the right people to talk to and verifying all of the content. What I get to do is a little bit different, though we do work together during violent events and extremist events. But what I get to do is sort of the opposite. And I actually refer to it from an anthropological term. And it's this guy, Clifford Geertz, coined it in the 70s and 80s. And he's an anthropologist, and he called it deep hanging out. And so like that is what I do on the internet. I do a lot of deep hanging out. And so I hang out in, my beat is misinformation, extremism, and the internet. And so I hang out a lot on Parler, which is in the news right now. I hang out a lot on Circle of Mamas and other sort of fringy anti-vax places. And so that's how I got the idea for Tiffany Dover is Dead, my podcast, and a lot of longer investigations, is that when a mass news event is happening, like it was when the first healthcare workers were getting vaccines in Chattanooga, Tennessee, I was watching the regular news, but I was also in all of my weird spaces deeply hanging out. And I could see that this was sort of a meteoric event in these spaces, and therefore it would have meteoric repercussions in the larger world. And that's sort of the sweet spot in a story for me. And that's sort of my process.
Deep hanging out, AKA lurking. Is that another?
It is exactly lurking. I get paid to.
Deep hanging out sounds really bad.
My whole job is to embed, maybe you could call it, with sort of the fringier folks who actually do affect our world.
Mm-hmm. And when you have one foot over in the news world where we're covering things as they break, and then you have another foot over in the fringier world, do you ever feel yourself being pulled one way or the other?
Well, that's the thing. I think at one moment it was really different pieces of the world, right? You had online and then you had IRL. And we really kept those places very separate. Something happened around, 2016 that caused those spaces to really meld together. And then we saw with the most recent election, like we cannot do a story about the election now without talking about conspiracy theorists and the wild places online that sort of breed them and grow them. It's become so intertwined that I think that more and more, what I hope to do, and what I think social news gathering has a large part in doing too, is to meld it and teach our beat reporters, our political reporters of all stripes, to find those weird spaces on the internet that affect your beat and understand what's going on there too.
And speaking of beat reporters, we've got two beat reporters with us today. Ashton, Jay, as reporters who recently came into NBC News, joined the company, and are now covering your own beats, how do you use social media to find potential stories and ideas? Ashton, we'll start with you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gotti, for the question. Social media is such an essential tool for finding stories, especially in my beat of career advice and leadership advice, entrepreneurship, and things like student debt. And so I think my two best hacks for leveraging social media in your reporting would be to curate your feed and to really take advantage of hashtags. I make sure that I have a separate social media account for all of my reporting needs. So I've already engaged with enough content about student debt, entrepreneurship, and career advice so that those things are just constantly popping up on my feed and on my timeline. And also just with using hashtags, people use hashtags on their posts to engage with a lot of other people and to reach a lot of other audiences. And so when you interact with those hashtags often, they tend to show up on your page more. So I think that's what I do, Jay. I feel like you have a similar.
Wait, did you just look over at Jay?
Yes, she did, because we are in the same room right now. We're in Philadelphia right now. But just to really bounce off of what Ashton was saying, and also what Brandy mentioned too, like we are finding unique experiences online in this massive world of social media. I mean, TikTok, I think I've published over or close to a dozen stories that are really I found on TikTok. And I think that heavy saturation of experiences in these marginalized communities, I specifically work and report with NBC Out, so LGBTQ stories, we find some really intense and interesting individuals, experiences on there, and then building a story around that 15-second clip it's really outstanding.
Jay, I think yesterday we did a story for Stay Tuned that I believe you were involved in, where it was a gay teen that caught a bully on camera and posted it on TikTok to kind of show what was going on, and that went viral. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Wow, let me just tell you that that was another one of the stories where I was just like, is this really happening right now? So Landon Jones, 18-year-old high schooler, he's been bullied and harassed for quite some time now. And I really dove into this story. I grabbed that maybe 30 seconds of his testimony, which showed home surveillance footage of, his alleged bullies at his front door, and then also an incident that happened at a local Starbucks parking lot, which was also like, which involved teens bullying him. So on there, I really took that clip and spoke with Landon Jones, his parents, Orange County Sheriff's Department, the school board. So I was able to connect a ton of dots here to put a real substantial story, or a story with substance from that clip. And yes, it was on NBC News Daily. I think News Now ran it as well, and stay tuned. But look at that. I mean, just the power of that. That video had over 1.3 million views, and getting it into a broader story, bringing in the details, actually really hit the mark with that actual story. So that was really exciting to do, but also just an important story that needed to be told as well.
Wow, and it looks like we're getting a bunch of awesome questions from the people that are joining us. Ali, I'm going to come back up to you. We've got a question from Michael, and he wants to know if there are any tools that are used to filter out the noise when you're attempting to crowdsource a story, especially right after something breaks, and then all of a sudden you start to realize that everybody and their mother, brother, sister, father are talking about the same thing, and yet it's getting harder and harder to find first-person accounts. So what are some of the tools that you use to filter out some of that noise?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And, one of the tools that I use often is Twitter Advanced Search. So you can really use some of these advanced search features in Twitter to be able to find those first-person accounts. So when I'm looking for a first-person account, I'm thinking, okay, if I were writing a tweet about having experienced, some, a mass shooting, for example, what would I be tweeting? So I'm thinking, using those first person pronouns. So I, me, my, we, using some of those words, also trying to, just filter out, different accounts. Say we're looking to speak with officials about, what maybe their police officers may have experienced. So we can use a filter on Twitter to look for just verified accounts. So there's lots of different good tips and tricks for being able to filter out what I guess I would consider a lot of the noise. And it's really being able to dig into those social media, those different social media platforms, and be able to figure that out.
And Alexa, we've got an amazing question for you. This is from Mildred. What trends should we be teaching about social media and journalism at universities?
That's a really good question, because the trends that we should be teaching college-age students are the trends that people of all ages should be kind of aware of. And I think one thing that we can be teaching people is that the standards of quality journalism also extend to social media. So looking for things like dates and times on social media are a sign of credibility. But in terms of just trends that I would say young people, especially college-age people, should be most wary of are probably just really aesthetically pleasing Instagram graphics. Young people feel really, especially during times of breaking news, during the hurricane, during the Black Lives Matter movement years prior, they feel really compelled to post. And if they're not posting anything, then they think that is a negative reflection of themselves. So we post really impulsively, and we're really drawn to these really aesthetically pleasing, beautiful Instagram graphics, but they can also be really oversimplified and can be a way to present really partisan information as kind of clear cut. And then also just TikTok trends in general, the use of pop culture to spread misinformation. We all love these kind of trendy audio memes. We're kind of conditioned to anticipate the punchline or the joke, but memes, pop culture, those are used to kind of recruit young people and radicalize people, and also spread false information. So just be wary of pop culture in general.
Alexa, is one of the biggest gripes about social media is that on all of these platforms, it's almost a place where nuance goes to die, right? And so when you're talking to professors or students, and you're trying to bring about this idea of creating nuance in a space where everything is so quick, what do you hear from students, and what do you hear from educators who kind of struggle with that?
Yeah, that's the thing. Misinformation is very nuanced. That's why fact checkers and journalists have rating systems for misinformation, because the best, most convincing misinformation has some element of truth to it. And I think we need to recognize that nuance when it comes to misinformation. There has to be some element of believability there. And so I think when we're, talking to young people, or when educators, professors are talking about the misinformation space, or just talking about social media in general with their students, is the importance to just take a pause and take a break, especially during times of breaking news, when our emotional reasoning kind of takes over and we start to post impulsively.
Now, we've got two questions, one from Vanessa, another from Melvin. How do you verify that social news gathering information you gathered is credible, trustworthy? And in the same vein, Melvin asking, when finding stories on platforms like TikTok or Instagram, what's the process like in determining whether a story is legitimate or not, AKA birds aren't real, for example? Brandy, do you want to weigh in on this one?
Sure. I mean, I think the point of, a lot of this is that a social media post is the beginning of your reporting, right? Like I see something in step one. I treat it like a tip, like you would if somebody called on the phone and you saw something. The great thing about social media, though, is it has all these clues. So like in terms of a video, there's this great tool called Embed that you can use that will look for, screenshots of that video in other spaces on Google and in other search platforms. So like there's a lot of like tools and tricks that you can use to find the fingerprint on a social media post. And so I think it's just taking that and then really dissecting it. And there's a lot of great courses. And there's a book called The Verification Handbook that I wrote a chapter for, not to plug it, but it's a really good way to sort of, it's a checklist, right? Like, how can I verify that this date is correct? How can I verify that this is a real post and not a screenshot? I mean, I'm just constantly looking out for ways that people and social media is lying to me, and then trying to make sure at the end of the day that I'm as closest to the truth as I can be. And there's a lot out there to help you do that.
Ashton, do you have any tips and tricks that you can share with us?
Absolutely. I think as much as we spend time vetting out information and making sure that's correct, you also want to make sure that the person that you're wanting to speak to, or the subject of that story, is a credible source as well. And just looking through their social media pages, LinkedIn, I've been able to find some really cool information about people that can go ahead and verify their credentials. I remember working on a story about a Etch-a-Sketch artist who was on TikTok, and she used the platform to pay off $13,000 in student debt. And a lot of people, the questions were, well, how do you know that's exactly the amount of money that she was able to pay off? Or how do you know that she actually was using TikTok to do this? And so in looking through her social media page, I was able to find receipts of her actually paying that student debt off in the amount that she said it was. I was able to find actually a roseometer that she calls that kept track of the roses that she received on her TikTok lives, which helped her pay off that debt. So just going the extra mile to make sure that you're really vetting those pages and being able to back up that information, it really goes a long way.
And Gotti, can I just bring up something really quick? That's a super good point. So social media doesn't always have to be at the beginning, right? Often it's used as a way to bio somebody. You see, like, so for example, there were all these stories in local news about these Save the Children rallies. And, they were on the side of the road, Save the Children. It was anti-trafficking. Sounds really good, right? But if you put any of the names in these local news stories of people who were out there with signs into Facebook and looked at their Facebook feeds, you could see that clearly these people were influenced by QAnon. And so social media can be a really powerful tool to verify after the fact as well.
Now, in terms of, let's say somebody's graduating and looking for their first job, and they're kind of aware of they're kind of aware of some of the fringe groups. They're kind of aware of what's happening across the spectrum, but they're not really that read in on some of the conspiracies floating out there. Brandy, what's your advice to somebody that's entering into journalism right now in terms of how deep they should go into rabbit holes just to know what is what, and to be careful about how they cover the news when there are things out there that look completely harmless that turn out to be a little bit more sinister?
Yeah, I mean, skeptical, not cynical about everything, right? Again, like I'm constantly squinting and making sure that these things are correct that I'm reading. But I think that, like, in terms of entering the profession newly, from broadcast to print, what's really important right now, and what, you know, the bosses and the suits all the way up to the top want and are, you know, obsessed with, are stories. And so if you can find a niche or a beat, and that's sort of what I did, that nobody else is covering, or you can cover that more deeply than anybody else can get to, and you can get original stories for that, that is definitely a way to differentiate yourself, you know, among your colleagues.
And we've got a question from Amy. She's asking, when looking for experts, is there a certain platform you go to first? Allie, you want to weigh in?
I think when I go to look for experts, I think LinkedIn is a really good spot to look through, because, you know, you can see someone's credentials, you can see, you know, where they, you know, may have done their education, or where it is that they work now. And then I will kind of, once I have that information from LinkedIn, I'll go and Google the person and see, you know, are they on their university's webpage? What is their specialty in? So for me, a big spot is definitely LinkedIn, and then being able to, you know, backtrack and fact check what's on their LinkedIn, because, you know, as we've discussed here, you know, just because it's on social media does not mean that it's true or real. So definitely being able to, you know, double source, triple source, quadruple source, even when it comes to finding sources.
We've got a question here from Astra from the City College of New York, asking, how can the media address the potential impact of digital media on the audience's mental health? That is such a fascinating, amazing question. Jay, you want to weigh in?
So I think it's very important to understand how heavily saturated social media has become, and I think that mental health right now is such an important topic. I think that it's being more spoken about very outwardly on social media as well. I think that it's definitely a platform. I feel like I'm not answering the question, but I think that when in terms of mental health and how social media has a way of also, you know, kind of it can offer or give triggers to certain situations, and sometimes in a good way and then in a bad way. So I do think that it's important to recognize that, and also as reporters, when we're maybe showing some of the sensitive information, like, I mean, for someone being bullied, that's a trigger to someone who might be digesting that content. So I do think it's important to kind of watch where you are on social media. I think it's important for us to also take breaks. I think that our iPhones are like our biggest critics when they're like, hey, your screen time is at like 6 hours now. Maybe it's time to take a break. But yeah, social media is definitely one of those big factors in mental health at the moment. But I think everyone on this panel can agree.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'd like to jump in after Alexa as well, because
yeah, as someone who has been regularly served TikTok's like, hold up, you've been scrolling way too long. I really hope that tech platforms can, you know, integrate more interventions to kind of curb doom scrolling. But it's really the quality of our information that directly impacts people's behaviors. It's the quality of our information that makes us feel anxious or scared, or, you know, drawn to conspiratorial beliefs. So inserting more news literacy, inserting more media literacy, or, you know, finding ways that we can all, you know, be more transparent in terms of how we report on these stories could also be what really helps make some of these spaces safer and more enjoyable and less traumatic.
Yeah, Alexa, it's funny because, you know, I mean, I've recently started to see mental health TikToks, and then you do your journalism thing, and then you're like, okay, who is this mental health expert, and how do they know so much, and some of what they're saying doesn't sound like anything I've ever heard of, and then you look back and they were hawking crypto before, or they were like covering the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case before, and you realize that they're just glomming on to mental health because they realize that this is a way to get followers, and it's kind of something that everybody's talking about. So what are some of the things that tech platforms can do to make sure that the information that's out there, or even mental health advice that looks like it may be coming from a professional who is actually not a professional, doesn't make it into somebody's life who may be desperately looking for professional help, not, social media help?
Yeah, it's tough because misinformers will go to like really great lengths and extremes to convince you that they are an expert.
Mm-hmm.
They will have a profile photo of an actual doctor wearing a white coat. So if you reverse image search their profile pic, that's still a doctor that shows up. So it's feeling kind of tuned in on trends that misinformers are doing, but in terms of things that tech platforms can do, there's always more. I think putting the disclaimer on content that's been fact checked by independent fact checkers is certainly a start. Kind of moderating some of these hashtags that are synonymous with misinformation trends, but then you have misinformers that are intentionally spelling these things incorrectly to try to kind of circumvent the algorithm. And then I think it just kind of comes back to news literacy and media literacy. These problems won't solve themselves, and we can't fully rely on tech platforms to solve all these problems as well. We really have to kind of educate the public so that they can spot this type of misinformation so that they aren't duped by someone who's just trying to sell them supplements.
Now, Brandy, we've got a question from Anetta here, and this one's going to be an interesting one. How do you know which social media handles to follow? How do you find the accounts and groups to join and follow on social media to build your own sources and content pool online? Brandy, you were very well known online now, and so I imagine this is a little bit different for you, because if you're following some of the edgiest edgelords out there, they notice real quick. But when you first started, what were the ways, and how did you keep tabs on everybody? And is it a good idea to follow everybody you possibly can on the internet?
Yes, follow everyone that you can on the internet. No, I don't. It's like, it depends on what I'm doing, right? Like, I have a tweet deck, and it's one of the tabs is weirdos, and it's like all of the weirdest, wildest like people that affect politics. And then I have another one that's like my anti-vax influencer crowd. So yeah, like I'm a librarian I didn't go to journalism school. I went to librarian school, and so I think of sourcing as curating, right? And so I am collecting and curating the perfect collection of either experts or weirdos or what have you. And I'm constantly refining that. I'm deleting, I'm adding, I'm thinking about, like, does this put my finger on the pulse of what this group thinks and feels and thinks? And TweetDeck is great for that. I also, because I am sort of well-known on the internet right now, you might say notorious, I have a separate account that I use to lurk, and I don't do that in private spaces. On private spaces, I'm always, Brandy at NBC, so people know who I am for ethical reasons. But if it's a public platform, I will lurk using my handle that has a Dolly Parton avatar, so I don't get blocked by bad guys.
Dolly Parton, huh?
It's cute.
We've got a question from Hector. What are some of the things that you've seen, some of the best ways to tell the news on social media? Jay, let's start with you.
So some of the, can I get that question popped up on the bottom again? I'm sorry. Thank you. So we're looking for good.
Yeah. What are some of the best ways to tell the news on social media? And I'm thinking of your TikToks.
So, oh goodness. Okay, yes. So when we think of these TikToks, I think, again, we are in digesting very quickly on these social media platforms. By that, I mean digesting all the content. They say that we have like a 3-second attention span, which I feel like I have like a 2-second attention span. But when you scroll, you have to be really captivated. And they say there needs to be, this is what I've been reading, is that there needs to be like an emotional, an informative, and an entertainment aspect to the content. How are we bringing that with sharing news? So, the first thing is the hook. You're scrolling, you see something. It's maybe surveillance footage from like the recent story I did. Surveillance footage is interesting. You're like, okay, what's going on here? What's about to happen? And a good text is like utilized in almost every video now, because some people don't actually have the audio on when they're scrolling. But that is just little things that I feel are a great introduction to grabbing an audience and then having them stay and watch that video and hear more about what happened. And then we can also from there, which is something I do with NBC Out, is I give like just a little tease of the story and then redirect them to the article in our bio. So.
Gotti,
Alexa, question for you. What are some of the things that you've seen that work? And also, what are some of the things that you've seen that just don't work on certain platforms?
So I definitely feel that. So Instagram and TikTok, there's just been this big debate. Like, I think Kylie Jenner weighed in and was like, why do we have videos? I think she was leading that group of individuals who were, you're trying to keep Instagram photo, just completely photo. So I do think there's a difference on the platforms, and especially how some of those users on either platform are consuming. Even Twitter, we talk about Twitter, we talk about, some styles. I think that in every platform, there's a unique way to really cater to the trends on certain posts. Like when you think about a thread post on Twitter, you'll click, obviously there's a text limit on Twitter, but when you click, you can break down. It's almost like a blog post. And that's very entertaining because you're just reading an article, but kind of on Twitter, which is kind of funny. And then Instagram photos. And of course it has to be something that captures someone's attention as quickly as possible. Again, that attention span is less than 3 seconds.
And Alexa, have you seen, you've got so many different options for graphics, for links, as Jay was just talking about, even Twitter threads. Have you seen certain things work better on certain platforms and certain things just bomb on others?
Yeah, I think what always works is authenticity. And so finding ways to, show like an authentic experience from your newsroom, or to have a person be the face and voice of these TikToks. And I think it's important to recognize that there's no one size fits all in terms of social media, content creation. What works on Instagram, like we expect really highly curated and polished content, and that extends to video. Whereas on TikTok, it's okay to have it not be the crispest, most clear video quality. It's okay to be using all of those features in app, so there's more of an emphasis on kind of the creativity and entertainment on TikTok, whereas Instagram is more lifestyle based. It's hard though, because at the News Literacy Project, we teach people how to identify credible news on these platforms. Newsrooms, they've been on they've been on Twitter and they've been on Instagram. We've been able to kind of establish some best practices there. But TikTok is just really uncharted territory. You have some organizations that are solely focusing on doing trending sounds and like sketch comedy. And then you have others that are just serving straight to camera information. And then you have so many newsrooms that haven't even joined yet. So I think it will be some time until we can really establish some across the board best practices so that we can teach people what quality and credible information looks like on these different platforms.
And part of the credibility, this is a great question from Leslie. How do you go about getting permission to use online content in your stories? Allie, this is something that your team does every single day. What's that process like?
Yeah, so for us, and it's a huge part of the social news gathering process. When we're trying to get permission to use content, our first question that we're asking ourselves is, okay, do we think this person is the original source of the content? So a lot of the times we're seeing, these different accounts that are what we like to call aggregator accounts, where they're reposting a lot of different viral content. And so for us, the first most important thing is really being able to figure out who the original source is of the content, because that is the only person who can give us permission to use it. So the original rights holder is the person who took the content. And the next thing we do, it really depends on the social media platform when it comes to, getting this permission. On Twitter and Facebook, it's a bit easier because, we can comment or we can DM someone, and the same thing with Instagram. But, as we've seen TikTok grown, it's become a little more difficult to try and get permission to use these TikTok videos because, we can't really DM people, and it's difficult to necessarily always comment on the videos because a lot of these viral videos, have such, there are millions and millions of people commenting on them. So sometimes, we're looking at the TikTok account and we're maybe trying and find that person on another social media account. Or, we're using different tools that we have available to us, like public records, to try and find a contact information for this person, whether that's a phone number or an email address. So, once we've established that we've found the right person, we're then trying to reach out to them in every possible way and to be able to get permission and to use our legal and standards approved language to obtain permission to use this content. And then once we have that, we're usually good to go.
Now we've got another question from Rhiannon Rashidi from the City College of New York. She's asking, what should journalists be wary of when looking at social media? What are red flags with online media in particular? Ashton, you want to answer that?
Definitely. I think just misinformation as a whole is something that journalists should be on the lookout for. Just making sure that you have credible sources. Also, I think journalists should be wary of. I feel like with social media, it's really hard to gauge whether or not a story will be triggering, as Jay would say, or if it's something that would offend someone. So just making sure that you're being mindful of those things. I think that'd be a great thing.
I want to jump in on that. Sorry, I want to jump in and say also, like, when we're looking back to the video aspect of social media now, which is obviously booming. Looking at a red flag for me is certainly like only seeing like 10 seconds of a clip and then finding out later there's an extra 30 seconds and you're like, oh wait, that totally did not look like what transpired. And then you look at those two clips from two different accounts, and that's where it comes into like finding the actual original video, but they'll have different captions, a different perspective. And then that's when you as a journalist or as a media professional need to go in, dig in, and really piece that together. But I've experienced that, and I've been like, I actually, it took me by surprise because I'm like, wait, there's another video? Where? And then I find it and I'm like shook to the core because now my entire story has changed. But then it's also my job to make sure that I get every single aspect of a story, and reading comments is essential because there's usually a few internet users who have done their research even before the journalists have. So that's also something I wanted to weigh in on.
I love to jump back in because I just remember my thought. Social media trolls, that's a whole ordeal. I feel like there's sometimes where people can comment on something on social media and they can seem like a credible source. They make it look like there's someone you can trust, and you go to their page and they have 0 followers, or all their pictures are someone who's not them. And so being on the lookout for those internet trolls is something really important as well.
This is a pretty loaded question, but I'd love to ask everybody on this panel, just because we all spend a lot of time. It's part of our jobs to be on social media. And so you see it from the front lines. What do you think the biggest pitfall of social media as it stands right now across platforms is? I mean, you just talked about trolls, Ashton, but I'd love to just go back to you. If you had to, the one thing that kind of keeps you up at night about your work on social media, what would it be?
I think, honestly, it's just like social media is such a rabbit hole of information, and it's really hard to get sucked in, especially with more sensitive topics. So actually making sure that you're taking time as a journalist to step back from what you're ingesting, I think that's just as important as doing the research. Because if you're not coming in a good headspace and really ready to ingest that information, it could show up in your writing. So I think just taking that time to really step back from that is super important.
And Allie, how about you? What's one of the biggest problems that you see, and what's a tip to kind of keep that at bay?
Yeah, so I think this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. And I think that you should always just be super wary of everything you're seeing on social media. Jay said it really well. Sometimes you'll only see a 10-second clip, and then you see the other 30 seconds and it tells a totally different story. So I think a lot of the times, and I think Alexa would probably agree with this, is that a lot of the times people forget to think critically when they're using social media. So they see the viral video and they take it for what it is. And really, as journalists, it's important for us to really dig deeper into it. It may appear to be one thing, but there's often so much additional context behind what we're seeing online. And so we really need to, as journalists, get to the bottom of it and, figure out what the real story is here, because, we don't want to be spreading misinformation or disinformation or misleading our audiences.
And Alexa, how about you? What's a one thing that you you think is problematic about social media, that and a way around it on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, that's tough because there are a lot of things that are good about social media that I love that are also what's being exploited. I love audio memes. The sharing of audio is central to TikTok's culture. It's also being exploited by creators that will add, out of context audio to videos and present it as fact. I guess what keeps me really up at night would just be, the spread of actual disinformation, and, algorithmic manipulation. And, I think just being mindful of, claims that are being spread by automated accounts, copy pasta, where the same or very similar language gets shared over and over and over again. And we know that the more often times that you hear a rumor, you're more conditioned to believe in it. So I get really concerned about these kind of really disinformation tactics, especially, in election year. And then, of course, someone who works in the misinformation space, I'm always, weary of am I amplifying this claim? Am I amplifying this, what could be a dangerous trend that might have otherwise gone unnoticed? So always kind of weighing the severity of the social media that I'm looking at. And, does this call for further scrutiny? Something I always think on.
And Jay, real quick, what are your final thoughts here? What's a problem that you see in a way around it?
Yes, I think well, back to how the algorithm can sometimes cater to you, which is absolutely scary to me. That keeps me up at night because I'll talk about the Bahamas one day, the next day I'll see an ad for it. But then it would also do is because I use those social accounts to really dig into stories, sometimes I can't even shuffle through the content that I'm actually looking for. So I do think that it's important to take a step back and realize what I'm digesting. Also, as remaining subjective as a reporter, making sure that I'm also reporting on a marginalized community, remaining biased and keeping my things keeping myself aligned with my journalism ethics, which I think that social media, being a reporter that grabs from it, it's very important to remember that.
And finally, Brandy, I'm not going to ask you what you think is wrong with the internet or social media, but I do want to ask, what is the way that you keep your headspace clear?
Yeah, this is probably my best tip about social media, and I learned it myself after the New Zealand mass shooting. And I've been watching so many of these terrible things, and even before the mass shootings of 2019, we see just a lot of bad stuff on the internet, harassment, just nastiness, polarization, all of that. And so now as a reporter, I'm very mindful when I sit down to do this work, whether it's, I'm going to have to watch a live stream of something terrible. I have a specific place in my house where I sit down and I open my computer and I literally say to myself, this is not happening to me. This is not my life. I am watching this, but it is not me. And then after my work, I close my computer and I hang out with my kids and I touch grass and I do all the things and spend all the time off of social media that I can.
I think that's wonderful advice. And it's something to keep in mind, because I do believe that we are in uncharted territory, and you are all on the front line. So thank you very much for your time and for all the wisdom. Great conversation. Thanks for all the questions in the audience. Those were some fantastic questions. Of course, you can visit NBCUacademy.com for more journalism advice, free educational content that we are constantly refreshing.